for this very unique event for the 10th anniversary of the Paris Agreement with the IPCC leadership. To start this event, I have the honor of inviting on scene the president of COP21 and chair of the Circle of COP Presidents, Laurent Fabius.
J'ai compris qu'il fallait parler anglais? Oui. Okay, I will switch to English. First, I would like to say to my friends, in particular Jim Ski and his colleagues, that we are very pleased to welcome them. And France is honored to have you here, and particularly Sciences Po. I'm very often questioned about what is the main reason why Paris has been a great success. And usually I answer that it is because we had the conjunction between the three S: science, society, and state. And science is largely you. And therefore, I want to pay tribute to you for what you have done before Paris and after Paris. Now, in the 5 minutes I have, 2 points. One about the past and maybe one about the future. The goal of limiting global warming to 1.5, which is included in the Paris Agreement, comes from a crucial convergence between science and diplomacy. On the scientific side, IPCC reports have shown before Paris that every fraction of a degree matters, and that the impacts of 1.5 are significantly different from 2 degrees. On the diplomatic side, I remember that the most vulnerable countries, it was not before Paris, just before Paris. It started in 2009, therefore it's a long time ago. These vulnerable countries warn that a world warmed by 2 degrees would be completely unbearable for them. And I remember that in 2015, at the beginning of Paris COP, these two elements came together. You had a series of countries, and particularly emerging countries, which were making a plea for 1.5, and you had many other countries who were in favor of 2 degrees. And it was very difficult to have a position. And I had to confess that I had personally, as the president of the COP, to make an arbitration. And the final wording is precisely this arbitration. It says that the world has to keep warming well below 2 degrees and to pursue efforts to limit to 1.5. So this wording is not purely scientific, not purely diplomatic, but it is the embodiment of, I think, a good combination of the two. It would not have been possible to choose 1.5 without the scientific work before. But it was not possible to eliminate 2 degrees, because otherwise no consensus, and the Paris Agreement would have been turned down. Therefore, it's the example of the matching of the 2. And another element, which maybe is less known, is that not in the agreement itself, but in the series of decisions which accompany, there are 140 paragraphs of decision, we have decided to ask IPCC to deliver a report on 1.5. And you delivered it in 2018, which showed the efforts to deliver and the consequences if it was not delivered. And I think it's interesting for Sciences Po and for the audience here, and to know how all that happened, and in particular to insist on the combination, which I think was good, between science and diplomacy. That's my first point, which relates to the past. Now, about the future. And I'm no longer in politics, therefore I can speak bluntly. There is a question, which is not an easy question, about the next report. When? You have seen the results of Belém. I was in Belém, okay. And the next 3 COPs have already been chosen. Next year, it's a sort of Baroque choice, very particular, very special. The presidency of the COP will be Turkey, but the presidency of the negotiations will be Australia. Good luck. Okay, but we know that it will be in Turkey. COP 31. COP 32 will take place in Africa, Ethiopia. Okay. It means, we know that already, that the accent will be put on the situation of Africa, and it's a good thing. But the COP afterwards is supposed to take place in India. Okay. It will be 2028. And obviously, it's very important that this COP, and the previous COP as well, but this COP will be a success because of the situation of India, which now is one of the first emitters of greenhouse gas, and because it's the year when you have the global stocktake. My own experience as president of COP21, which is the landmark of the COPs, is that if a COP has to be successful, science must be delivered before. Otherwise, it's useless. And therefore, obviously, it's your choice. It's difficult because you work by consensus, and already always difficult. But I think I am clear. And I think if we want, and we need it, not only for India, but for the world, if we want to have an improvement in the coming years, which is absolute necessity, it would be an excellent thing to have at least the main elements, the main scientific elements, before the Indian COP. A final word. There are so many things on which science has to give us the elements. Tipping points. What about not only how to transitioning away, but what about the reservoir, the sinks, and what about extracting GG from the atmosphere, because now it's absolute necessity. And I'm very confident in the work of IPCC, but I think one of the main elements is in your hands. Now, I wondered how could I give my personal tribute to IPCC. I had an idea for you, Jim. It's something I had in my pocket, which is not the real gavel. It's a copy. But I will give it to you, Jim. And I've written on this, to IPCC with my warmest thanks and with my signature.
And so now we can welcome on stage already Jim Ski, the chair of the IPCC, Robert Votard, co-chair of Working Group 1, Bart van der Urk, co-chair of Working Group 2, and Joy Jacqueline Pereira, co-chair of Working Group 3. And I'm very pleased that this discussion will be moderated by two of our very own Sciences Po students, Gottfried and Junju, who we're also welcoming on stage.
Thank you, Ariane. Dear President Fabius, dear Chair of the IPCC and co-chairs of the 3 working groups of the IPCC, and dear fellow students and guests, good evening. My name is Yunju Lee. I'm the Master's in Environmental Policy at Sciences Po. Before we begin our discussion, Gottfried and I would like to give you a short introduction of ourselves. My own path into climate policy began years ago in South Korea, where I'm from, where I volunteered with an environmental NGO working on coal phase-out campaigns and plastic waste monitoring. Since then, I have had the chance with working with UNFCCC, OECD Environment Directorate, and International Chamber of Commerce as an intern. This experience have shown me how scientific assessment like those of IPCC gradually turn into debates, policies, and decisions that shapes our lives. For many of us in younger generation, the IPCC is more than an assessment body. It is a global reference point. It is our scientific compass that translates complex Earth system research into clear signals about risks, pathway, and choices. As more and more youth take part in climate action under Paris Agreement, IPCC findings helped guide our work, whether in local projects as I experienced in South Korea, contributing to national climate policies, or preparing to sit at negotiation table in the future. At Sciences Po, we are trained to read these reports as tools that help us question whether today's priorities or NDCs match that science tells us is necessary to protect vulnerable community and secure a livable future. Therefore, moderating this discussion feels like both a privilege and a responsibility, because our generation will live with the consequences of today's choices. I hope our discussion will illuminate how the IPCC is supporting its implementation of the Paris Agreement and how we can better connect rigorous science with the ambitious, just, and effective climate action. With that, I'd love to hand over to you, Gottfried.
Well, dear President Fabius, dear Chair of the IPCC, dear co-chairs of the three IPCC working groups, and dear fellow students and guests, good evening, and thank you very much, Indu, for introduction. My name is Gottfried, and I'm a second-year student in the Master of European Affairs at Sciences Po, following the Energy, Environment, and Sustainability track. But I also come from a scientific background, as I have a bachelor in physics, and I was a student at Centrale Supélec before joining Sciences Po. Over the years, I've been fascinated by the sheer scale and rigor of your collective compilation work. From my perspective, the IPCC's report stands out as a remarkable achievement, grounding climate debate in evidence and giving society the tools to act. But of course, science alone isn't enough. Policymakers must make choices, set priorities, and turn solutions into concrete action. From the outside, it can be frustrating to see how slowly institutions work. But since 2015, the world has changed rapidly. Emissions continue to rise, the window for the 1.5-degree target narrows, and climate has become a major political issue in Europe, while elsewhere we've seen setbacks from renewed climate skepticism to political reversals. And that's why today's discussions matter so much. Considering the work of all four IPCC working groups together helps us keep sight of the bigger picture at a moment when decisions are not only harder, but also more urgent. Thank you.
Thank you so much. So let's start our discussion. Terskia, I would like to start with you. And my question today to start is that since the adoption of the Paris Agreement, countries have relied heavily on IPCC assessment to guide their climate strategies. From your perspective, what are the most important ways in which the IPCC has supported the implementation of the Paris Agreement so far?
Okay, thank you very much. And I'd like to start actually by expressing my gratitude to Laurent Fabius for this gavel. And it reminds me of a story about around the approval of the 1.5 degrees report, which was quite gruesome. And I was one of the co-chairs who helped put it together. So after we had finished it, I went back to my hotel room, and I was so tired from staying up many, many hours that I actually fell asleep at the desk in my hotel. And I suddenly woke up and thought, I've fallen asleep at the podium, and looked around for my gavel. So I have this there available to me. Now, to get to your question, I wasn't trying to avoid it. I mean, the 1.5 report, which was invited under the Paris Agreement, I think was one of the major contributions. It was a game changer, I think, in terms of scientific evidence. And apart from the newspaper headlines, it fed into the first global stocktake that took place in 2023. When we had got the report out and we could measure the progress that governments have made. And I think it's provided the kind of benchmarks that individual countries can measure themselves against as they look towards their progress. So it's been a way of them measuring how far they've come forward. And my hope is that even though emissions have continued to rise, that it's encouraged increased ambition in the nationally determined contributions that countries have offered. Now, obviously, as IPCC goes forward, the challenges won't go away. It is very obvious that we are almost certain to exceed 1.5 degrees warming in the near term. The big new question we have to ask is whether we can bring warming back to 1.5 degrees in the longer term. And we've spent a while talking about that out at Saint-Denis today in the lead authors meeting. And the fact that we will exceed 1.5 degrees and risk crossing tipping points is also a signal that we need to pay more attention to impacts, adaptation, and losses and damages, which will be in the next report.
Thank you so much. I agree indeed that the sixth assessment report and also the previous reports are definitely a game changer. And there I've seen, including my home country, South Korea, there are a lot of benchmarks about how we have to increase our ambition, and challenges are still there. So we have to increase for more for our future. So I would like to go next to co-chair sorry, excuse my pronunciation, Pereira. I'd like to ask you that since 2015, many countries have strengthened their mitigation policies, contributing to lower projected warming compared to pre-Paris trajectories. And at the same time, current commitment still fall short of limiting warming to 1.5 degrees. And how should policymakers interpret this combination of progress and remaining ambition gaps when thinking about the next phase of global mitigation approach? Thank you.
Thank you very much. First, let me start by thanking the organizers for allowing me the privilege of sitting up here and sharing some findings of the IPCC with you and sharing with you how we plan to move forward. But I'm the co-chair of Working Group 3 from Malaysia, and every time I speak to a crowd of young people with the beauty of youth in their faces, I am so inspired, and at the same time I feel very bad that our generation and the generations before me have not done a good job by the you today and not done a good job for the future. So this is something I generally in my class start by apologizing for, yeah, because especially my classes where I come from a disaster risk reduction background and I deal with humanitarian issues, and the first step to prevent any disasters is to actually prevent the source of that disaster. So that has been a big motivation for me, and that is, and looking at the beauty of youth here in this room always reminds me why I am here and doing this hard, grueling work that Jim refers to, although I have lesser of a grueling time and more coming in the future. And so in terms of the Working Group 3 reports, what we do is we assess the scientific literature on emissions and the greenhouse gas emissions, the aspects of removing it from the atmosphere. And in doing that we get the, I'm just going to draw on the latest findings. It is true the human contribution of the net GHG has increased by 54% in 2019 compared to 1990, and that the contribution is primarily from carbon dioxide from fossil fuels and industrial processes. So we are very happy in terms of what has been assessed in the report, that the Paris Agreement and the Kyoto Protocol and all these other agreements have supported these rising levels of national ambition. That is without a doubt. You have now, under this participation, a lot of policy, regulatory, economic instruments. These have been assessed, deployed to be deployed successfully, economic instruments as well. And you have a lot of things becoming increasingly, mitigation options that are becoming increasingly cost-effective and generally supported by the public. And in terms of that, these examples of electrification, such options include, like, solar energy, electrification of urban systems, urban and green infrastructure, energy efficiency, demand-side management. Is quite a range right up to the green aspects such as improved forests, crop and grassland management, and reducing food waste and loss. And these are things that people support these days, not in many, many parts of the world. And these are found to be technically viable, they are increasingly cost effective, and the unit costs have also reduced. And like Sir Jimsky has pointed out, when we released our report, we called for rapid, deep, and immediate greenhouse gas emission reduction. But since then, what we have found is that the nationally determined contribution has not been as the assessment of what was implied, yeah? That was the basis of our assessment, and we find it that it's likely we will exceed warming. And in that context, our report captures only a snapshot of what has happened up to 2022, and moving forward, we hope to capture more progress, yeah? And that's what we are discussing in our lead author meeting today. We want to capture changes in policies and technology to find out lessons learned on what has accelerated action and what are the good practices that can accelerate further action. And that's what our authors are hoping that our report will cover in terms of policies and actions and governance at different scales, including impacts of emissions and drivers, as well as the projected emissions that are coming, and the relationship between not only the global levels, but also the national and the sectoral levels, yeah? So that people can get so that we can produce key messages that are actionable. So in this context, this is Working Group 3 has got 3 I's. The first I is about inclusivity. We make sure we are inclusive in all our methodologies, inclusive in participation, inclusive in representation of gender. Our second I is all about integration, and it's about integrating all the different methodologies across, looking across to adaptation, because the reality is that you cannot do adaptation and mitigation in isolation anymore. Yeah, that has to go together. And the third I is actually on impact. We want to come up with key messages that are actionable. So we hope that our work will deliver to you and make for a better progress in this world, in this context. Thank you.
Well, thank you. Yeah, thank you for your answer. I have a question for you, Mr. Vota, as the co-chair of Working Group 1. So, given the last projection of the Atlantic circulation, including the Gulf Stream, could you share what changes you expect over the coming decades, and what could these changes mean for Europe and our daily climate conditions?
So, thank you for this. Yeah, thank you very much for this question, and I'm always very happy to share what we understand and what we know. So, let me just introduce myself. I'm co-chair of Working Group 1, the physical science basis of climate change, and I'm working with my fellow co-chair who is in the room, Zhang Xiaoye, there almost every day, and in this period it's every day and every hour. So together we assess the physical changes. So now I would like to say that I'm coming from a mathematical background, and I used to study, you know, the systems that are not simple, that are simple systems, but that can change very rapidly with bifurcations. It's called dynamical systems theory. And I wanted really to know what happens with climate, such a complex systems. So to answer your question about the changes for future temperatures, for future things, I think this will need to be assessed in this cycle, but we have preliminary numbers from different reports. First of all, before the Paris Agreement, by 2100, some of you in the room will be there, maybe. So the changes, so that was 4 degrees before, and today, what we hear, the changes for the future are around 3 degrees. Let's be simple. So first of all, there is a very simple message. The policies that have been implemented, so these are for the implemented policies, they work. They work. We should not give up. So what our assessment says essentially is that we are currently at a warming level of about 1.36 degrees. This has been an update from our previous IPCC. So that was on the 1st of January of 2025. And unfortunately, the climate, the temperature is rising very, very fast. The estimate is about 0.27 degrees per decade. That's the best current estimate, which makes actually a crossing with the same pace of increase of temperature of 1.5 degrees at about 2030, in about 5 years. So that's where we are at the moment, and it's going to be very difficult to avoid that. Unfortunately, this leads to a large number of impacts, and I have prepared a long list, but I'm not going to cite it. But one thing, for instance, is the very fast increase in the heat events, very fast increase in other type of extreme events, a rising sea level, etc., etc. So currently, we are way below we are far away from the ambitions of the Paris Agreement with the current implemented policies, but we can estimate the first sign of them. So they are still working in a very small amount at the moment. So this is what I can say on this question. Thanks.
Well, thank you. I have a question for you, Mr. van der Heuk, for Working Group 2. So it's kind of related to what's just been explained. Since the Paris Agreement, how has its implementation shaped adaptation policies, and what key lessons or changes in strategy have emerged as countries work to strengthen climate resilience?
Yeah, thank you very much. Bart van der Heuk from the Netherlands. I also have a physical background, but in meteorology. And a couple of years ago, I went to change my field a bit towards more water management, etc. And the Working Group 2 domain is much more on the implications of say physical extremes for society, for ecosystems. And indeed, as Robert sketches, the Paris Agreement has definitely, paid off. We are, President Fabius, very grateful that he has succeeded to slow down the warming significantly. But indeed, the prospects are not good, and so additional, impact reduction, disaster reduction, but also adaptation, but also coping with unavoidable damage. Residual damage is a reality, and as such, that's not special. I mean, humans are adaptive species. We have always adapted, and so that is also a bit the difficulty in a way as well. I mean, you can say, you've always adapted. I mean, if we wouldn't, I'm from the Netherlands. Yeah, our country wouldn't have been there anymore because about 40% is below sea level. So that's the clear case. But and you can say, I need to scale up a bit that adaptation because your climate is changing, and that sounds logical from, say, this slow sea level rise kind of thing. But for some areas, this is not a trivial thing at all. There's a lot of impacts that accelerate enormously. Yeah, and that is, I guess, it's not too long ago also in the discussions around climate science and IPCC. Say 10, 15 years ago, adaptation wasn't that popular. it was actually perceived as, oh, that's maybe an alibi to not reduce, we just adapt and then everything will be all right. But that is definitely no longer a reality, because I guess since Paris, climate change has, I would say, democratized. We see it. We don't need the computer scenarios anymore to see what's happening. But there's testimonies in the newspapers almost at a daily scale, and professionals in agriculture, professionals in financial risk management, they see in their statistics that climate change is occurring reality. And so not only the climate itself accelerates, also the impacts accelerate. And that is there to stay. So that whole adaptation mission is a prominent thing. And that is also visible in the Paris, in the UNFCCC negotiations. There's a lot of attention nowadays for adaptation. There's a global goal on adaptation. And a lot of interest goes about, okay, we need to measure what actually the required adaptation is and what the current adaptation is, and then to see what is actually the gap in between. And then also what does that cost to recover from that situation, which is a baseline for international negotiations about adaptation financing to support poor countries, the vulnerable countries, etc. And that now in itself is getting a very political theme. And that's also new. That wasn't there in 2015. And that puts an interesting charge to the science as well, because now we have to make impacts and the adaptation measurable. We have to make a monitoring system and an indicator system that actually is able to track exactly what is the gap, what does it cost, and what is attributable to climate change. Yeah, and then recalling to the beginning, adaptation is there always. That attribution to what actually the extra surcharge of that adaptation is that can be attributed to climate change, that is a difficult task. But you are the complex system dynamics fan. I think complexity is really, that is the bread and butter of a scientist. And finally, we think climate science is a complex thing. And the experts here in the room doing on political science, economical science, that's where the real complexity is. So let's work together a bit more.
Thank you so much. Indeed, that I really like the phrase that you shaped, that as climate change has democratized, because indeed we don't need to really look at the difficult scientific measures or the reports, that literally we can feel and we can live with the very severe climate changes. So indeed we really need to work together. So given that, I'd like to invite all the panelists now to reflect on a question. And my question would be, having heard perspective from all of the 3 working groups and chair, where do you see the biggest remaining gap between the scientific understanding that IPCC has provided and the decisions of governments still need to take to keep ideally 1.5 degree, but well below 2 degrees within reach?
Well, I mean, just to say, in this question, there is clearly a gap between the messages that science is conveying and the actions that are actually being taken by individual governments. And we do debate sometimes, and we hear different points of view. Is it because we're not speaking clearly, or is it because the governments are not listening? Now, I will acknowledge that sometimes IPCC reports could be drafted more concisely and clearly, but I would put out the contention it's because it is an extraordinarily difficult task to deal with climate change. The difficulty is in the policy side, not in the science side. And the way I see it is that climate change is so difficult because dealing with it involves touching absolutely every aspect of society and economy. It can't just be done by technical fixes. It goes much, much deeper. And I think that's the challenge, because when you get to the Conference of the Parties, what is up for debate is some very fundamental choices about economic and social development, about the distribution of the costs, the distribution of the benefits, and that's why it's so difficult. And I may also say, I mean, we people in IPCC, we're not just meteorologists and natural scientists. We do encourage a big range of disciplines in the social sciences and the humanities to get engaged in IPCC. And the coming reports will actually be paying a large amount of attention to issues around equity and justice, both between countries and within countries, which I think is a challenge at the moment. So, I mean, to get back to the basic question, we try to speak as clearly as we can, but we think there's also a listening gap as well.
Yes, indeed. True. The more I study environmental policy at Sciences Po, and also when I did my bachelor's in political science, I just realized there's no one-size-fits-all solution, or there's no like silver bullet that can fix all. So indeed that we have to work together. Is there any other insights or thoughts?
Yeah, I would like to add that from the physical science, our messages were already sent, I mean, in the last cycle, the main message, and policymakers should not wait for our next report to start action, for sure, because everything is already there. Of course, we have things to refine, to go at smaller scale, to represent what the impacts are, and also what we will be facing. I'm always the person who brings the bad news, I'm sorry. What we'll be facing is clearly events, extreme events, that we haven't seen. So clearly it's a challenge for adaptation, because usually we adapt to what we have seen. The last huge event that we have seen, for instance, in France in 2003, there was a huge heat wave, and this heat wave, following this heat wave, there was a heat plan, so there was a climate policy to face such heat waves. Before there was not. But that was an unprecedented event, and there will be much more unprecedented events. I am not sure that we are prepared for events such as those who were witnessed, for instance, in British Columbia in 2019, or humid heat events in many countries today. But again, the major challenge is communication also, definitely. We are too scientific in our communication. We want to be very precise on each number, give error bars, etc. We have to invent new ways to talk about physical science. That's a huge challenge. And we also have new ways to talk to youth. So I think this is the challenge of this cycle. And I will put a strong emphasis on communication.
Yeah, there's definitely a couple of things to add to this, because I guess apart from, say, a listening gap, it is also the choice of the scientific topics that we bring in the reports. I mean, we have to witness that also this behavior of delayed climate action, you know, everything that happens on this planet has to be considered a rationality. Otherwise, it wouldn't be there. So so that is also a scientific subject or an object to research. Why is this action so delayed? And it's too easy to just make it a moral statement that we are lazy or not, or just preferencing ourselves. I mean, there's so many barriers to overcome. And I mean, if it would be as simple as, you know, if you calculate all the damage that is to be expected from the continued emissions, this whole mitigation thing is peanuts, so cheap. But yet it doesn't work like that, because there's not such a market where you can choose either a long-term damage or let's do something now. That market doesn't exist. Everything has to be rooted in true dilemmas. every decision is a dilemma because every decision changes the level playing field. And so the science should also seek into, what are these dilemmas, present the dilemmas, and admit that somewhere a valued political discussion has to be resolving the weights of the various arguments, I think. And so we are also, apart from communication, which is definitely a very sincere thing, but I think that goes with a bit of empathy with how difficult it is to make the decision. And also we are talking about framing the problem not as here's the solution and if you don't take it, that's not a smart thing. No, okay, we understand that this is difficult, but here are the essential dilemma branches, and I think that could help the political process where we can actually compare, okay, the weights between the different interests. So I'm very curious exactly in your kinds of science contributions to the IPCC.
Thank you. Another aspect, in addition to what my colleagues have said, my fellow co-chairs and chairs have said, is this IPCC has traditionally tended to focus on very, very specific national level decision makers. And our first attempt to actually look at very nuanced key messages covering that links to multi-level governance is our special report on cities, where all three working groups are coming together and to bring key messages not only to the national governments but also to the subnational level of governance. And this, I think, offers an opportunity for us to send in messages, and at the local level we know everything, when you implement things, when you're sitting in this room, how do you differentiate environment from social? We are all sitting here from adaptation, from mitigation, In one parcel, in one building, everything is integrated, and you need to look at it in that perspective. And so this is a very, a first time that all three working groups have come together to look at how we can integrate things and do things in a very, in implementation, and bring out key messages that are effective related to like nature-based solutions. In my country, nature-based solutions help with floods and cities. So those kind of real-life examples can be brought to fore for practitioners at the local level. One thing is communication, but the other thing we need to understand is capacity. And this capacity, particularly for us from the tropical countries, we are now looking towards the small island states to see the frontliners, how are they coping? What kind of local knowledges do they have? And what kind of local knowledges do we have in the tropics that can contribute and help us to adapt and manage, and at the same time go on a pathway towards low carbon development? So these are new knowledges that have to come up, and the chair is convening a workshop, expert workshop on different knowledge systems, and we hope that this will bring a change in the way that we bring our key messages about.
Well, thank you very much for answering our questions. I think we can give a round of applause for our panelists today. So we're going to have a short time for questions from the public. So if you have any question, you can raise your hand and I'm just going to pick you. I see a question here. So I don't know. Yeah, you. Well, I don't know. Yeah, that one. Perfect.
Thank you. Is it working? Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you very much for the discussion. It's very interesting. I was wondering something about the geopolitical context and how it affects your work, especially as populism is increasing around the world. How do you think the IPCC and environmental discussions can stay relevant in this context?
Yeah, I think that's the question that always comes to the chair, because he always gets the difficult political questions to answer. It is undoubtedly true that I think science is facing challenges now in the environmental sphere. You know, the very spirit of multilateralism is under charge internationally, and unfortunately, I think it has entered some of the ways in which we conduct our activities. What I can say very positively, there are 195 countries who are members of IPCC, and for every meeting we will typically get something like 120 countries in the room. They're not always the same countries that come there, you know, it goes up and down. But at the recent plenaries, I think I have not detected any diminution of the quality of the debate that is actually happening in the meetings. Plainly, countries come from different perspectives. It sometimes takes us a long time to get to decisions. But I do hope that science is kind of a constant factor. You know, there are scientific truths which I think my colleagues, you know, can put forward in their reports. And I think it's my ambition that we kind of keep that candle burning while there are political storms along, and science is actually a way of perhaps holding things together. So that's my optimistic answer to your question.
Thank you. Maybe we can go for another question. Yeah.
Hello. Thank you so much. There was a very, very interesting panel discussion. I wanted to ask, so the OECD, they publish every year a climate action monitor. And within this monitor, it has shown that there has been a general slowdown of climate policy action, and more specifically climate mitigation policy. We can also see this with like a lot of countries being very late to their NDC 3 submissions, a lot of them missing the deadline early this year. And I wanted to ask more specifically, what do you think can be done to encourage climate action globally, other than, you know, what you have mentioned with, you know, reducing this communication gap? And maybe a bit more specifically to co-chair Pereira, how can IPCC encourage climate mitigation action?
So that's what we have 230 people working on at the moment, discussing on how we can move forward in terms of assessing the literature and learning from the past since our last report on how we can move forward. So we hope to have key concrete responses for the world when the report comes out, starting with the cities report. But generally, we all share out the same aspirations. Yeah. At the end of the day, we should remember that we all breathe this. We all want clean air. We all want, clean environment. We all want opportunity. Yeah, and this is the way we should see each other. And I'm not going to respond to what specific policy because the authors are all working for it. But in terms of the aspirations that we have for our working group and the vision that we have is of key actionable messages, and that we want to look at two threads. Yeah. We want to look at threads of not only allowing space for development and low carbon development, we also want to look for space of how to move financial markets. Yeah? Financial markets are moving very strongly now. Voluntary markets are getting stronger. And even in Belém, what we saw was standards coming from industry standards that are coming up from the ISO. And these are things that are very hopeful for us. If we must not only talk about the climate financing that is available, which is not a big fraction, there is a bigger fraction available in the financial markets, particularly the capital markets. So we need to look at these lessons and how to accelerate the transition through these markets and speak not only to one group of people, but to multiple different levels of countries with different levels of development. Thank you.
Thank you. So is there
Yes, sorry. I just had one question. So this is the first time the three group meet in one conference. What does this bring to your group in each of?
Yeah, thank you. That is indeed, sometimes I have this question. I think we have to understand that in previous cycles, working groups were collaborating, of course, but an efficient manner. You know, the work of IPCC authors is not only to look at papers and write their reports. It's human. It's deeply a human work to exchange with colleagues, to build strategies on how to present things, to exchange with colleagues, to try to get together all the body of literature which is available. But now, if we all work in our fields, Working Group 3, technologies, economy, and other things, Working Group 2, biodiversity, human systems, and physicists. You know, if we all work in our silo, it's not going to work. So what we are trying to do here is to address in this meeting, and for the first time of IPCC ever, what we are trying to address is a few questions that are very important. For instance, as how we are going to be together to assess the futures, the scenarios. How are we going to look at what they are saying from different views? I mean, global warming levels and all the physics on our side, but socioeconomics on the side of Working Group 3, for instance. It's very important that we talk together, because without our colleagues from Working Group 3, we would not have the narrative that is behind from the authors. We would have them from the books, but not from the authors. So it's very important. It's a human experience, and exchanging with our colleagues is extremely interesting, and I'm sure it will change things. Yes, so they are addressing, they are taking, you know, points of contacts in different groups, mechanisms for integration between working groups. So it's all going very well.
Thank you very much. I represent UNESCO, and we in UNESCO, we are running, we've just started a global initiative on information integrity on climate change. We are very happy that the chair is on the steering committee and supporting us. And my question is about communication. What else you, from your perspective, your stakeholders as well as you, can do in order to strengthen communication, in order to strengthen the combating climate disinformation? What are the platforms? What are the ways? How do you see it? Maybe you need a fourth group on communication or something else, but just to reflect on what one of the speakers was talking about a little bit deeper. Thank you.
Yeah, maybe I can take that one. And just to say, IPCC has been placing an increasing emphasis on communication as our cycles roll forward. So we have a head of communications at the Secretariat in Geneva with support staff, and Andrei Mahasic, the head of communications, is actually sitting in the room at the moment. And furthermore, each of the working groups actually has some communication staff in there as well. So we're thinking about it quite carefully. And very interestingly, in the last cycle, as we came towards the stage where we were preparing the reports, we had communication experts working in parallel with the authors who were developing the summary for policymakers, so that there was coherence between the formally agreed documents that the governments came up with and the public-facing messages that we were trying to get across. So I think we have done a lot better there. And to go back to one of the other questions, we have actually thought a lot about how to emphasize the messaging in our reports. And just one very big issue is the question, do you emphasize the risks of climate change and emphasize the fear factor, or do you look at more optimistic and look at the opportunities? And the truth is, we need to walk a tightrope and convey these two messages at the same time, because too much gloom and doom disempowers people. So we have to offer people the opportunities as well. So we are paying a lot of attention to that, and I do think our communication standards have improved greatly in the last couple of cycles. They have moved forward a lot.
And if I may add, it's also about networking and make sure that the communication has an audience to reach. And for the cities report that Joy already mentioned, we have also an active networking strategy. We team up with all kinds of city organizations or financial experts already now. And we invite them, for instance, to do reviews on the report in order to let also these more practitioner stakeholders also have a say in how they would like to see the message being framed or visualized. But we also work together with them to stand by at the moment that the report gets released, that the communication that is going out there after the approval is not only the IPCC communication, but immediately a lot of organizations stand up by with their message across. And of course the ability of, stakeholder organizations to put in messages that are maybe a bit more policy prescriptive, that's up to them. We should not and would not do that, but they have of course a message to convey to their stakeholders. So I guess also the strategy of communication has attention.
Hello, can you hear me? Thank you so much for this very interesting discussion. I had a question on your stances on how to handle climate deniers, especially in a democratic context. How can we move forward when an increasingly, a non-significant group of people don't believe in climate change or don't believe that it is caused by humans? As scientists, how do you reason with them? Thank you.
Yeah. Okay, I mean, we clearly work can work in a difficult environment at the moment. I mean, we have to focus on the scientific basis, on the evidence that we found, and we need to stay consistent with the messaging. And frankly, we are not going to get engaged in with tit-for-tat debates about, particular scientific issues, because we know the deniers go in, they pick little bits, little fragments of evidence, and use it to misportray the overall picture. We have to focus on the overall message. For example, on the issue whether it's human beings that cause climate change, we're quite clear that there are multiple lines of evidence that support the arguments that we're making. It's observation, it's modeling, it's paleontological analogies that allow us to reach the conclusion, and all the lines of evidence are pointing in the same direction. And we just simply have to get these messages over consistently and keep repeating them, because it's not enough to say something once, you have to say it twice, 3 times, a dozen times for it to get through.
Hello, thank you so much. I have 2 questions. So the first one is relating to the very first one, which was about the political situation. I wanted to specify this a bit and wanted to ask if you think that this will also have implications for the line-by-line approval of the summary for policymakers. As I think in the last years there were sometimes already some states that kind of maybe intervened with some wordings, and if you think that this will increase in the future, or if you have any strategies, if so, to make transparent the changes that have been made. And the second question is to a different topic, but you mentioned that the 1.5 degree scenarios will likely not be achieved in the short term, but we have these kind of overshoot scenarios, and I wanted to ask if you already have some discussions or ideas how they will be changed in the future reports, if there will be maybe more of these overshoot scenarios, or how this fact that we probably will reach 1.5 quite soon already will be dealt with in the future reports. Thank you.
So maybe I will take your second question. We need to explain a little bit to the audience what overshoot means actually, because it may differ. We have heard. So what overshoot means actually is having temperatures which rise and then come down to a certain level and surpasses a certain threshold, not a threshold, a certain target, like for instance 1.5, and then for some reason come down. So those reasons are not natural reasons. We cannot, from natural processes, make the temperatures go down. This is not possible. The first thing we have to do for having an overshoot, so exceeding a level and returning, is to drastically reduce greenhouse gas emissions. That's the first very important conditions, but that will not be sufficient. Even if the emissions, the net emissions, come down to zero, the temperature would stay at a level, would not come down. If we want them to come down, in addition to that, we would need to do what we call carbon dioxide removal, which can be based on nature, on the one hand, reforestation, etc., but also on other technologies. But we have to, this is a hot topic of our cycle, and we have chapters dedicated to that, both in Working Group 3 and in Working Group 1. Working Group 3 mostly on the technologies, Working Group 1 mostly on the response of the Earth system to those trajectories that would exceed and return, overshoot. And we do not have enough evidence at the moment, enough simulations to be able to understand the global pictures of that. But what we kind of know is that it's not easy to make the temperatures come down, and probably only by 1 or 2 tenths of a degree, and probably not much more. But we need to assess that in detail from the literature. Maybe, so that's for the overshoot.
Yeah, and on approval sessions, one of the things I would like to flag is that approval sessions have always been difficult in IPCC. It's not a new feature. My first IPCC outing was in the second cycle in the 1990s when I was a coordinating lead author, and the approvals were difficult then. In fact, in the second assessment cycle is the only occasion in IPCC history where governments failed to approve a summary for policymakers and had to come back and do it twice. So it's not something new for it to be difficult. And I think the reasons why it's difficult are very obvious. It's simply a difficult job to do. We are trying to bring scientific evidence and present it in a way that is meaningful to governments, is in language that they understand, and also, let's face it, some of their interests, are at stake there. So, when governments do come in on issues, we are theoretically not engaging in a negotiation. It's a science policy dialogue. In fact, it's a science policy dialogue that has taken on some of the characteristics of a negotiation, if I can put it that way. So there are interests at stake there. It is intrinsically difficult to do. And talking to people who've been involved in the IPCC system for longer than I have, I think some of the most difficult approvals were actually in the very early stages of IPCC, when, as it were, the existential questions were, is climate change happening and are human beings causing it? Then we answered that question. It's unequivocal now. And now we're at another critical stage. where really things, we're in real difficulties because we now need to take serious action if we're going to deal with climate change. So it is not surprising that it is difficult to run through approval sessions, but we have not failed yet, in spite of incredible difficulties of having virtual approvals during the COVID crisis. We always got there in the end, so I remain quite optimistic.
Thank you very much to our panelists for this engaging and inspiring exchange, and thank you so much for everyone to keep your attention to us. And this concludes our panel discussion today, and we'll now move on to the closing remarks. Thank you very much.
And for the closing remarks, we have the pleasure to welcome on stage the president of Sciences Po, Louise Vassy.
Thank you everyone, and welcome to Sciences Po. I'm coming straight from the metro, but before that from London, where in fact climate was very much on the agenda, including with my counterpart, president of Oxford University. I'm going to be very short. I just want to tell you that you can really count on us. You can count on Sciences Po for two things. You can count on us to uphold the appeal to optimism that you concluded your intervention with. But also, my informants told me that during the discussion you underlined that, of course, technical solutions, engineering, hard sciences are, of course, key to dealing with the ecological crisis and climate change, but also that many of the bottlenecks and the impasses that we are confronted with are, in fact, political, social, financial, geopolitical also. And that is exactly what we want to explore here, this connection between the fundamentals, of course, brought by including geophysics and resources and the understanding of the dynamics of climate change, of course, but also understanding where we do wrong when it comes to these social issues that need to be addressed if we are going to survive on this planet. The other commitment I want to make tonight is a commitment to truth. We need facts, we need science, we need a discussion that is based on the realities that science is able to explain to us. Otherwise, there is simply no possibility of dialogue, of progressing, and that's, of course, something that we need to do specifically in universities, and that's what we are going to do here. We are going to do it in a very peculiar way at the Climate School, but of course beyond that specific endeavor, because we are a peculiar place. Two facts that I like to recall about Sciences Po. One is that half of our students, more or less, are international, but the other fact that I like very much is more subtle. No more than no nationality at Sciences Po represents more than 6% of the student body, which means that, in fact, we are an extremely diverse platform where the whole world comes together. And that is true for the institution in general, but it's also going to be true for the Climate School specifically. It is going to be extremely international from the beginning. We are now receiving applications, I have to say, in great numbers, but also from all over the world. And so we will maintain this role that we think we have, of course, to be a place, frankly quite unique, I think, at the global level, where, in fact, the diversity of perspectives, of origins get together. So these are the commitments I want to do tonight, and also I want to thank you, of course, for having chosen us for this important discussion. Just a month after the fantastic Climate and Nature Week that we held here, and halfway through the creation of the Climate School, which in fact exists administratively, but will obviously open when the students arrive in September. I think it was right that you came here, and we are extremely honored that you decided to do that. So thank you very much, and enjoy your evening at Sciences Po.